Now, this is Brandon Carmody with the latest from the LGBTQIA community on the GNR Radio Network.
You're listening to Gay News Radio. I'm Brandon Carmody. We want to welcome our listeners in the United States and around the world. You've probably seen the headline by now: Trans woman live tweets her TSA nightmare. Today we're going to welcome special guests Shadi and Neola. Shadi is going to tell us firsthand her experience with TSA at the Orlando airport, and we're going to have a great discussion about traveling while trans. So without further ado, please welcome our special guests Neola and Shadi.
Unfortunately, it happens a lot more than I think a lot of folks who don't go through this experience. It happens so much more than I think folks are aware.
With TSA specifically.
Yeah, I mean with TSA, but if you think about any place where you're kind of going through like any kind of search or surveillance, of your body and your identity, and having to use different like using a document to get access to something, and that's and depending on the different rules of things, I mean it can get really hard, for folks to, because there's like so many people who don't have, the financial stuff, or don't have access to legal help, and different things like that, who can't always get access to changing information, on a license or a passport, or different things where that carry your identity information. But then also it's just about that, like, TSA and specifically, like, has had some really significant issues over the years, specifically because of body scanners and because of how they work. And I think probably a lot of people saw there was like a former TSA employee who kept a blog, and was writing about it years ago, and how they changed the scanners and how they were using the scanners. But if you see on Twitter, is like there's a lot of people, who are speaking out about this. I think using the hashtag, traveling while trans.
Right.
In the different, the different incidents that can happen with people questioning your identity. And in airports like that, it's an incredibly public place, that it's happening.
And my understanding of this story is that they forced the TSA agent to choose, male or female gender, and then the scanner somehow is programmed to scan accordingly. That alone is frightening.
Yeah, so right before you step through, as long as they're asking you to go through a body scanner, which you can decline and say no, that you'd rather be searched, and they take you to a private room. There's some things, but that's also hard, because then people are like, why are you going to another room? It's just like so many like things, going through your mind can be incredibly frightening, especially if you're traveling by yourself, and you don't have other people with you. But yeah, every single person who goes through a TSA body scanner, there's one of two little buttons that they push right before you come through, and it's based on what they think they see about you. They make a call based on what they think they know, and when you go through that scanner, it's then programmed to say, quote unquote, there's anomalies in places, so it depends. There's folks who have different anomalies show up. In the case of Shadi, like that's what came up, and then there were questioning, and then this person was not, because you can ask for it, like, I want a different agent, I want somebody else, or you can say, I want someone as my gender, and, there's some things built in, to, where you can advocate for yourself, but they have to, cooperate with that. TSA and other agencies like that have to cooperate with that, or they're supposed to be. They're the ones who tell you, ask for someone,
My understanding is that there's several open either lawsuits or actions against TSA by organizations like Trans Equality. Are you familiar with any ongoing legislation or talks between, LGBT organizations and TSA?
Yeah, I know in the past, I mean, because there have been some significant things that have happened in the past, is that been some other organizations. I think maybe a Transgender Law Center in the past. I don't know that they filed a lawsuit, but I know that they were working with TSA to do some training. But again, it's like it depends on the region that you're in and what airports and what agents that you have access to. And I know that the National Center for Trans Equality has joined a lawsuit, and I'm not familiar enough with it to know the status of it, and to know what's happening. And I think ultimately what it's about is, commitment to making sure that people are treated humanely and respectfully, while traveling, and committing to that and going through training, but also figuring out like what's going on with the processes, that needs to change.
Sure. And just for the record and for our notes, what is your role and your title, Nola?
Well, so I guess my role in communities, I'm a community advocate. I've worked for many years, in different states in the U.S. as a community advocate, as a community organizer. And right now I'm working as a consultant with a variety of different organizations on some issues like this, things like I work with organizations and agencies on understanding what it means to have trans people working in your organization or in your business. I help people understand a little bit more about us and how to treat us respectfully and interact in a better way. And so that's like the kind of work I do. So I'm always like trying to pay attention and listen to these things, and also like, some of my own experiences of different things. But
is this, I hate to ask, but is this uncommon to see this type of trans discrimination, or is this really sort of the whole point of her story and what's going on these days?
No, I mean, her story, that's what I really feel like her story is unfortunately really common, is that, it's depending on, and I don't totally know where the breakdown is. The way I usually work is like, okay, I want to understand a little bit more where the breakdown is. Some of it is that people don't have familiarity or willingness to understand that there are trans people, in the world and are coming through and willing to understand that. But also is that if there's an agency like TSA that has the ability and the possibility to do training and figure out how their policies about searching, can change and be more encouraging of people to travel. I mean, I feel like I talk to so many other trans people who are just like, I will only travel by train, or I will drive somewhere if I have to. I don't want to get on a plane because I don't want to have to go through that process,
Wow.
And then,
so literally,
I mean,
fear of traveling by TSA, going through that invasive body scan or even a pat down is what turns most people off to the experience, right?
Yeah, and I mean, and I even for myself, like I travel, I take airplanes, many times a year, and every time I get ready to go to the airport, I think about, okay, how do I look today? Because I can be read a few different ways, and how I identify is that I think I have to think I think so carefully through what clothes am I wearing? Do I need to change how my hair looks? Like, how do I need to change how I'm looking so that I don't go through, it just becomes this very hugely nervous thing, and my throat kind of tightens up, and I feel like, I usually can get through. I mean, I end up with pat downs for different things, but it's been the thing of thinking about, well, should I just, so I'm not feeling nervous, should I just say, I don't want to go through the body scanner, and then they're going to pat me down, which both things just feel like the worst possible decision, but traveling with friends who are trans, with family members who are trans, I mean, just that, going through that process yeah, I mean, I think for anybody who's this doesn't really happen to anybody, is just I think take a look at, Twitter and Facebook and see that there's a lot of people who are using the hashtag traveling while trans and talking about what it's like to feel the humiliation, and to feel the complete and total disrespect of someone.
And TSA must be aware. They must be aware that there are concerns. I'm looking now at a picture that she tweeted, and the sign says, "Were our security agents courteous today?" And there's 4 buttons that you can choose, ranging from happy to medium to extremely unhappy with the red button. And I'm so pleased that she tweeted the photo of her hitting the red button. But that's an interesting option. So that's like they're surveying their writers at the end, like, how was your traveling experience with our security agents? And you hit a button based on your experience.
Yeah, my assumption is that, especially because there's an active lawsuit, or that because there are these national organizations who work on behalf of trans people, is, my assumption is that TSA definitely knows this is going on and knows that that people are having these experiences, and going through the scanners and how they're being treated and talked to. And that, there's the other thing that happened too, of like missing your flight. And then I don't know if you travel by air anytime lately. It can
rarely,
be really hard.
But I do, yeah.
Yeah, but it can be really, if you miss your flight, it can be really hard to be like, hey, I need to rebook my flight. And also, please don't charge me fees for doing that, because the problem with going through, I had to go through security to get to my flight, and I've been detained because there was a quote unquote anomaly on my my scanner, and so that's also happening. It's not there is the significant experience of feeling humiliation and disrespect in front of other passengers, in front of other TSA agents, things like that. But then also there are some of the other things of, like, if you got somewhere to be and you miss a flight, that's, there's not a whole lot that can happen, to get you there. So,
I'm reading now, just to give both sides a fair shake. TSA has tweeted out, "Thanks to Trans Equality for participating in our ongoing discussions concerning the security screening process." So, yes, they acknowledge, yes, they're putting out a thank you to Trans Equality. So there are clearly ongoing discussions, it's fair to say.
Yeah, I would think so. I don't, and I know, like, it's been in the last couple of years. I remember there was something that happened, I think at maybe like LAX or another large airport, is that there was some significant things that were happening. And I remember, like, at least the agents that were part of that airport were part of some training, some workshopping, some talking about how to treat trans people respectfully, how to interact respectfully. So I know that there's, like, it appears that there's the willingness there. And I think for them to tweet that out, it's like, we're talking to NCTE. NCTE is a really great organization and does some really, really amazing work. And so I feel like, I'm pleased to know, like, they're on the case, like, they're working on it. They're trying to figure this out. It's hard sometimes to be like, it shouldn't be this hard to have to deal with all of this. It shouldn't have to, we shouldn't have to go through many, many layers of these things. And unfortunately, I think that's where we're at.
I wanted to ask you about, since we're both from Portland, I wanted to ask you, clearly Portland on the LGBT scale, now having been ranked number 2 as far as LGBT population in the country. I know that you just said that you've done some travel several times per year. Do you find that your trans experience is far better in Portland? Does it worsen along the journey? Like, how does your experience rank when you travel nationally?
Yeah, no, coming out of Portland, I almost always have a really great experience going through security, and in the Portland airport, and I've heard that from a lot of different folks. It doesn't mean that other people are not having, not great experiences, but I typically have a pretty good experience, even though I feel really nervous. I feel much more nervous, though, about going through the airports where I need to return to Portland. I'm not originally from Portland. I'm from Mississippi, and so, like, I recently, like, in the last couple of years, went to see my family, and having to go through that airport, having to go through the airport, which I've flown through many times, but, appeared very differently, and appeared to conform much more, to how I'm read. And this time, in the last couple of years, I felt like I was going to crawl out of my skin of, like, having to go through, the security desk. And it was fine. It was okay. I ended up not having to go through a body scanner. I had to go through just like a metal detector. which is rare in a lot of airports, but it was still one of those moments of some panic. But yeah, I mean, so far I've had really great experiences going through the Portland airport.
That's great. And so it's more the return trip when you're going through airports abroad to come back through that you have a different experience then.
Yeah. Or it's just, I think sometimes it's that you get used to, for me, it's like getting used to an airport and knowing, okay, these are the things I need to do to feel okay about going through security and boarding my flight, and, and not knowing as much about the other airports, and then also wondering, okay, well, I know that, folks in this airport have engaged in conversations. I mean, I've had conversations with some of the customer service folks at Portland specifically about trans travelers. I've had those conversations. They were totally willing to have those conversations, to hear feedback, things like that. And I think because I haven't had those experiences, with other airports, and I feel much more nervous about it. And also because I keep seeing, you see reports like this on Twitter, on Facebook, on different social media of people who are like, I have flown through, and in the case of, Shadi's experience, coming through Orlando is these different airports, and this is what's happening to me. And so, I mean, unfortunately, I feel like my assumption is still, it might not be okay. I might not have an okay experience, and I feel like I feel like that's where things are at. I think realistically, it's they do have some work to do, on figuring out how to do this.
Right.
Thank you for letting me know about the response, from TSA talking about that they're working with National Center for Trans Equality on this. So.
Well, I have the opportunity to speak with you, Neola, let me open up the spectrum a little bit, looking at the national stage and trans visibility. So the television series Transparent, both the lead actor Jeffrey Tambor and the creator Jill Soloway just won Emmy Awards for Transparent. So let me get your reaction there. Is Transparent good for the trans community, and does that bring added visibility?
I haven't seen it yet, and I haven't watched Transparent. Surprisingly, I feel like I'm maybe the last trans person ever to see it. And some of that is I need to kind of work through my feelings of there are not trans people who are portraying, the issue of Jeffrey Tambor. I mean, I know many people have been really, really excited about how he's portraying the character of a trans woman. And so it's one of those kind of difficult things to think about, when there is a show where there is a major trans character who's not being portrayed by a trans person, when there are, trans actresses who are out there who could do it. But I also am seeing that it's a really important thing to talk about the families, of trans people and support networks, and the experiences of, that trans people are needing and wanting the support of families and other people around them. And that, I mean, there's two parts of this, is that, whenever we see a spike in visibility, is unfortunately we see often, I would say not sometimes, but often we see a spike in violence against people of that identity. So we have seen in the past many months, in the past year, we've just seen a lot. Laverne Cox has been on the cover of multiple magazines. Caitlyn Jenner has been on the cover of Vanity Fair. There have been a lot of different media pieces about trans folks, specifically trans women. And we've also seen, at least the reporting of a spike, we have a lot of trans women who have been murdered this year. And it's possible, that's always been happening, and we're just now learning about it and finding out about it. And there's more to that. I think it can be a little bit of a complicated story to say there's more people, who are experiencing this, versus we're actually starting to recognize them as, as human beings, as these trans women who have been killed, is that people are recognizing them as women too. Is that that hasn't happened in the past. And so, there's one of those things of I, don't totally know what, what to make of that story, other than it's happening, and it's horrific, and it's terrible. And, so I think that there's like sort of this like two sides of this issue of transvisibility. Is absolutely there is a trans civil rights problem. And transvisibility is incredibly important, but I mean, there's also like the issues of how is it happening, who is creating that visibility, like there's a lot of those pieces there, I think.
Laverne Cox said recently that it is a crisis, called it a crisis, and also looking at just at the Caitlyn Jenner story. I mean, there has been a lot of transvisibility this year between, Janet Mock, Laverne Cox, Caitlyn Jenner. Did you have any response to the Caitlyn Jenner story? Did you feel that there was authenticity? I know there's a lot of controversy because she's privileged and she's rich, but I have actually looked into it a bit deeper, and I believe that there really was a lot of genuine pain and a real struggle. I think this is very real with Caitlyn Jenner.
Yeah, I feel like that's hard to question anyone's struggle, of absolutely. And she has talked openly about that she has access to money. She has access to wealth and possibility that many other trans people don't have access to because of the cost of when we talk about transition-related care, we talk about hormone therapy, we talk about different surgical procedures, those kinds of things, even just like being able to buy clothes that feel good for you, or buy makeup or, those kinds of things.
Oh, well, hi there.
This is Shadi. How's it going?
Hi, Shadi. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Brandon, and you're on with Neola Young.
Hi, how's it going?
Hi, Shadi.
Hey. Sorry for interrupting. What's going on? Are we talking, or is this all being recorded now?
Do you have a few moments, or did I catch you at a bad time, Shadi?
No. This is good. Let's start.
Okay. Shadi, thank you for coming on Gay News Radio. We understand that you were traveling recently and had a poor experience with TSA. Would it be all right if we ask you to share your story with us today?
Sure, sounds good.
So what happened?
Oh, I was just traveling from Orlando to Minneapolis, and those full body scanners that are there. I stepped into the scanner, and the way those work, and I guess people don't really realize this, is that the person on the other end of the scanner who works for the TSA looks at you and then presses either a blue button for male scan or a pink button for female scan. So it doesn't really matter what your identification says or how you identify or what you have in your pants. All that matters is what that person sees. So when I go through, people usually I think they've always hit female. The issue with that is that, I'm transgender and I have both breasts and a penis, which isn't something that I really want the world to know, but that shit's kind of sad. So when the scan happened, because he had hit the female button, and they weren't expecting that maybe, it showed that area, which then makes me have to have a groin pat down. But that wasn't that big of a deal, actually. I wasn't, I've never wanted that to happen. But then what happened sort of became problematic because I told them what it was. I said, I'm transgender and that's my penis in the groin area. And expecting that they would rescan me. And he said, I should have scanned you as a male then. Are you a man? And I said, no, I'm transgender. So I don't identify as a man, but I do have a penis, And then he's like, well, are you a man or a woman? And I was like, well, I'm transgender.
They didn't understand, did they?
It seemed like,
right?
And I was kind of taken back. Exactly. Yeah. So I was kind of taken aback, and I just said and I know, one of the policies that was released by the TSA before for trans passengers was that you could request a supervisor if you wanted. Because they've had kind of a problem with this in the past. So I said, I don't know, is there, I don't know if you've been trained in transgender issues, but is there anybody else who I can talk to that has been trained in these issues, and he did not like that. And then he kind of got frustrated, and he was like, I know what I'm doing. And then I was like, I don't think you do. So, he had said at some point that I should step back in and be scanned as a man. But then another officer said that I couldn't be rescanned since my genitals had been flagged. I had to be pat down. And then they kept asking me if I was a man or a woman or a man or a woman. And then, so then I was, and then it just kind of escalated from there.
So did they consider you a security risk, or are they following kind of their TSA protocol? I mean, how close to the line of their must-do protocols, which we all understand is for terrorism, how much between their established protocols and your civil rights were they dancing the line? Were they right on the line? Were they over the line? How close did they come?
I think there are a lot of policies in place that have been problematic. They've had problem with cancer patients and prosthetic breasts. They've had problems with people with wigs or prosthesis, and there are a lot of bodies that maybe don't fit the sort of magazine norm of male and female body, or if somebody doesn't present with sex stereotypes like they expect, those bodies sort of don't fit maybe what the computer expects or what the person reading the computer expects. So then you're flagged. So the issue is, do transgender people, because we have bodies that aren't maybe expected by the TSE, even though we're flying all the time, is that a guaranteed reason to go into additional screening? And so I think the issue is, like, when you have a whole culture of people that are being flagged and held up because of their bodies, then that becomes discriminatory, if it's happening so frequently. And when my story got picked up, and I did not expect this to happen with all these international news coverage, but when my story got picked up, I mean, I was scared. After being pulled aside, they did a pat down, and I initially had said that I didn't want to have, because the second decision I have to make is, who's going to touch my groin? Is it going to be a male TSA officer or a female TSA officer? And I don't really know what the process is. So I didn't want to make, some woman just doing her job have to touch a penis. And I don't want to, and I don't want a male officer on my breasts or whatever else if it escalates. So it was just kind of this, like, real challenging thing. And I said, so I asked to be rescanned. I was like, can I just be rescanned? Push whatever button you need to. They said, no, we're kind of past that point. And then, so, ultimately somebody did. And they don't even end up really touching your groin. They just kind of rub the inside of your thighs and stuff, but like with the back of their hand. But they did that. And then they did a swab on my hands, and then that tested positive for explosives. So then I had to go into additional private screening in a separate room, and my bags had to be checked. And in that screening, they did a full body pat down. So I got a second pat down. And then her gloves tested positive for explosives again. So at that point, I was crying, as that was happening, and I was left in the room alone with TSA officers and police and a bomb specialist all outside. And I didn't know if they were just trying to teach me a lesson at that point. I'd missed my flight. I knew I was going to miss my flight at that point. I was crying. I was in that room alone. I didn't know what was going to happen. So that's when I tweeted to tell people where I was and what was going on. So it was like maybe just a lot of bad coincidences. Ultimately, there were no explosives, but it was just, the fact that my genitals flagged that initial concern, like, put me in that position to have to go through the machine, a couple times. And when the story took off, like, a lot of trans people have come forward. To almost every one of my friends has said, this has happened to me too. My genitals have set off this alarm. So it's a big problem for the trans community.
These are incredible, Shadi. Neola Young, can I ask you to respond on the experience that she's telling us about? Do you have any thoughts or reaction?
No, I mean, other than just like, there's, Shadi's talking about like all of her friends, people are like, yes, this has happened. I mean, it's like, it's happening. It happens to so many people. It's happening a lot more than I think we sometimes hear about. And I think it is incredibly brave and amazing, Shadi, that you're telling your story publicly, because I know that can feel really, worrisome, and fearful of like, is there going to be some retaliation or, and people won't believe you. I mean, there's like all those things, that happen and kind of run through your mind of like, if I tell the truth about this, will people believe me? Will people support me? Am I in danger for doing this? I think it's incredibly helpful that your story got picked up like that, but I also know that that comes with, a lot of complicated feelings and worry. But yeah, I mean, it's like, I think, like I said before, Brandon, it's just that this is happening. I mean, this is not like a one-time thing, and this is not something that can just be swept away. Just like, right. This is one airport, this is one agent, this is every airport, at least in this country. This is every airport, this is everybody's scanner, this is anytime folks are having to go through those scanners.
Yeah. And thank you for saying that thing about, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
About not being believed, because I actually didn't have that running through my mind. Like when I tweeted, I was scared. As a trans person, that's the other thing too. Is like, I mean, yeah, there's things I don't want people to know. I don't want a crying photo of myself to be my number one Google search result, but that ship has kind of sailed. And I don't want everyone to know what my genitals are. That's like, I think the trans community's worked really hard to like not make that the central focus of like our lives. So, the fact that both of those things happened, that's initially what I was concerned about. And I didn't, when it was happening, I didn't know that it had been picked up and that it was all over the place. It wasn't until the next morning that I was like, when the media really started calling, that I understood that it was bigger than, just my Twitter followers. But yeah, it's amazing how many people don't believe me, and I'm just getting all these messages about how I'm a liar and how I'm deceitful and I'm tricking people, and then what was most surprising is that the government, the TSA, immediately issued a statement the next morning, to the New York Times and all this other press that said that they take civil rights matters very seriously, and they had opened and closed an investigation, and then I didn't have any basis for this. So the government is telling people that I'm not, not to believe me immediately, and it was just so.
They're still tweeting. They have it right here. This was 24 hours ago. TSA, thanks to Trans Equality for participating in our ongoing discussions concerning the security screening process. So that's probably a PR move, because they're trying.
It's totally
to
a PR move, because I talked. Trans Equality actually has a lawsuit, a current lawsuit against the TSA over these issues. So I don't think they consider themselves a partner at all. They're somebody that has a lawsuit against them, and they're definitely involved in advisement. But I talked to Trans Equality today, and they said that most of their involvement with the TSA is them making recommendations and the TSA ignoring them. And then I also talked to the TSA for a very long time. There is a civil rights division. It's called something different. I have to be so careful, because everything I say is under such scrutiny right now. It's actually called the multicultural branch of the TSA. They called me to open an investigation. And I talked to her for a long time, and I said, "Wait, you're just opening it? How long do investigations take?" She's like, "A month. It takes them 7 to 10 days to even get the footage that would be in place, the video and audio footage of the event. It takes them 7 to 10 days to even get that from the airport, and the TSA doesn't own that. That's all owned by the airport. So it just takes a while for them to get stuff, and for everybody, all the contracts to be signed and all that sort of stuff to be done. And there's a lot of protocol in place. So she's telling me it's going to take a month for a civil rights investigation, and she wants to take my statement so that she can start it, because it has to, I have to start it. So the fact that they just said that they did a 24-hour civil rights investigation it's just a lie. That then the TSA the next day is telling me, she apologized to me for sure. She said, sorry about that. I don't, the PR department has its own motivations. And, I asked her if they could retract that statement because it makes me look like a liar. And she said, she'd do her best. So it's a very, very large organization. I think she's told me that they have something like 45,000 employees. But they really don't, they've known about these trans issues. I think some of the first things I've seen have been since 2003 by Andrea James, but they've known about these trans issues for a long time. And I think it's just, I think they just, nobody has said this, but I think it's just one of those things that's kind of an acceptable risk to them. It's just, this is going to happen to us in our community, but, they're not doing a lot about it.
I know there's a lot of visibility on your story, to be honest. I mean, it was Huffington Post and Cordy and Gay Star. It blew my mind how fast it blew up.
The Guardian, the New York Times, yeah.
Right.
I
want to ask you both the same question. When a major story, trans-related story, breaks like that, do you, in both of your personal experience, do you find that members of the trans community sort of rally together and continue to discuss whenever there is a story like this? I know that Neola, you had heard of Shadi's story, right?
Oh yeah, no, it's everywhere, and all of my social media and email and personal conversations everywhere. Yeah, I'd heard her story.
Oh wow! See, I have no idea. I haven't even been on Facebook. I haven't really been on personal stuff except for my Twitter account, just to do sort of the ongoing stuff and answering questions. But I don't really have a sense of it. I'm going to a trans. There's a equality event in Minneapolis that takes place once a year that happens to be today. So I'm going to go down there, and that'll be my first experience talking. I talked to a couple other trans people that are friends of mine, but that's amazing that's happening. I did get a lot of support. I don't, but it's surprising. I mean, I'm getting support. Like, there are people that are like, I'm a conservative. There are a lot of people that think what the TSA is doing in general is problematic. So there's a lot of support and kind of coalitions happening between like a lot of intersections of people. The Traveling While Trans hashtag happened, but there's also like Traveling While Black, Traveling While Arab. A lot of people,
right.
A lot of marginalized people have these issues. So, we're all kind of supporting each other on those issues. But
let me ask you this. What's your regular experience? I mean, still, obviously, all the issues you've identified with the body scanners and TSA, I'm sure that it's uncomfortable wherever you go. But what's your normal experience when you travel? Is it even on par with this, or is it kind of uncomfortable every time you travel through TSA?
Well, it's so interesting because I called my friend and I said, my trans friend, and I said, I never have problems. And I actually thought the TSA was amazing. I think I've read all these articles about how good the TSA with trans issues are. And she's like, what articles? And I was like, I guess I made up articles in my head. I travel a lot, and I haven't had issues. When I first started transitioning and I started to look different than what my ID was, I carried they had regulations. They've since taken down a lot of their regulations from their website, but they had regulations. I carried a doctor's letter with me. So, when I went into the security line, I gave them my ID and my boarding pass like everyone else does, but I also gave them a doctor's letter. So, they have some procedures in place, and I never really had any issues. I've always been nervous about picking up groin or breasts. I've actually had my breast patted down twice, but it was kind of on the side, so it's kind of like, maybe something in my bra or something. But I've always worried about it, but I've traveled so many times I completely stopped worrying about it. And I think it's when I thought it would never happen that it happened, and I was really surprised.
Neola, you were telling me earlier about some of your experience. Do you mind recapping some of your travel experience with us?
Oh yeah, sure. What I was saying is that I get nervous every time I travel, and I as Shadi, as you're telling your story, I'm thinking about my perception of TSA isn't just I feel intimidated by people who, I feel worried about and intimidated by people in uniforms often. That's just a thing of my life, and so I know that that's part of it, but also reading that, I was talking about the blog that came out, that was a former TSA agent who was writing very honestly about all of the different things that were happening, going on, sort of behind the scenes. And the different things that they were doing, and how the body scanners changed and why, when they were using the body scanners. Anyway, so I think kind of creating this narrative in my head, but also that, like, because I am an advocate, I am a trans advocate who is trans, is that I talk to and listen to so many people's stories about different travel experiences, and that's why, like, when Shadi's story surfaced, I was like, that's horrible, and I'm not surprised that happened. Yeah, and I think, I'm trying to kind of, like, figure out a way, like, where is my perception of that coming from? But I mean, I feel nervous every time I travel and have to get in that line. I feel worried, and I always end up with a pat down. And like Shadi's talking about, like, they're always really good about, like, back of the hand. It's a very light pat down, and they say, I'm going to pat you down in this part of your body. And so I appreciate that. But it's also just one of those things of, like, I feel, like, really embarrassed and nervous that it's all happening right in front of a whole bunch of people, and and I'm aware that, like, that's happened, that you used to be able to, and I think some people still do, because when you purchase your ticket, you have to, or you're supposed to, when you put your information in, you're supposed to put your gender marker that is on either your passport or your driver's license, whatever you're using, to board the plane. And if it doesn't match up, like, that's a problem. And so there's been this allowance for, you can have a doctor's letter too, but if you're giving that to the person, who is just saying, okay, your ticket's valid, you are who you say you are, go into the line, and then you have to put all of those things up, and then you go through the body scanner without any of that information with you, which is what happens. They're like, no, put all that in your bag, or, like, put it in the tub or whatever. You can't have it with you. So the person who's actually looking at your scan doesn't have that information. It's just like one of those hiccups, I think, in the procedures, of their policy, is that you can do that. Anyway, I'm rambling at this point, but it's, I mean, I feel nervous every time. I feel less nervous now going through the Portland airport, because I've had now, I think, enough experiences with TSA there that have been really positive and really amazing and just a breeze. But going through, especially southern, like, going through southern states, I'm from Mississippi, and I was talking about having to, travel back when I went to see my family, going through a tiny airport and just feeling like not, to the point of nausea, of being worried. I went to a trans leadership conference with a bunch of other trans folks, and we had to go through a very small Tennessee airport all together, and that was one of those moments of, like, I was really thankful that we were all together, and we were there together. We were all advocates. We know the drill, and it was one of those moments of, like, I feel nervous, but I also feel like, okay, maybe this is best case possible scenario, that we're all together and can kind of help take care of each other. But that's been my experiences.
And that might be my experience too, is that I typically travel from Minneapolis to LA or LA to New York, and so being in Florida isn't very typical, and that's where this happened. So maybe it's a coincidence. But
one thing I noticed that I think is so relevant, and this is part of why I think your story has exploded to the degree that it has, Shadi, is that you live tweeted, and I love Twitter. This is the way to reach the people. So what you did was you live tweeted it, and I think that's why the TSA is probably having closed door discussions, not just embarrassment. Like you said, there's a lawsuit involved, but you have photo after photo showing what happened to you. I'm looking right now. Your tweet reads, "The TSA at the Orlando airport told me I couldn't take photos, but this is denigrating. I have missed my flight." And you literally have a photo from inside the room that you're in, and you can see a guard holding the door. So you have photo after photo. You even have a TSA agent who asked you to leave the airport. Is that right?
No. Which photo is that? No TSA agent asked me to leave the airport. But you know what?
Okay.
Well, there's a whole other situation, which is with American Airlines. So when I missed my flight, there was kind of an issue where TSA told me not to come back out. They said, you'll be flagged again with the explosive things, whatever that is. Stay inside the airport, find a gate, rebook your flight from there. American Airlines doesn't rebook flights from the gate, or from the gate, so you have to go back out. And I got on a tram, and I ended up in like an outgoing thing, and I really didn't want to go out and go through that whole process again. But I ended up having to go back to the gate, and they didn't rebook me. They said that there was only standby flights. They could rebook me for standby flights only, and or first class. So and if I wanted first class, I'd have to pay for it. So I was on the phone with NBC at the time, and there was, people were starting to call me. And with the first news station that called, they were like, I said, oh, you know what? I would love to do an interview with you. Can you help me get my ticket through American Airlines? Like, I just asked them, and they're like, sure. And so I was like, oh, that's cool. So, because they wouldn't do anything, and I wanted to get home. So I was like, oh, that's great. So then I, went, and my phone was out of batteries, and I was recharging my phone. And then the American Airlines clerks didn't understand what was going on. Of course they didn't, because this doesn't happen, right? Like, there's probably not many passengers, but there's a national news story exploding, and the news stations were talking to American Airlines, and then American Airlines had tweeted, sorry about the inconvenience, you're rebooked. And then I tweeted back to them, like, I don't know about that. Like, where do I go? Like, what do I do? And I was expecting them to call. So there was all this sort of stuff where, like, the online American Airlines people and what the news was telling me, like the NBC News told me that they had talked to them and they were going to help me. So I was waiting for a call from them, and I wasn't using the counter. And then I was like, should I go back to the counter? And they weren't really responding, and I really wasn't sure what to do. American Airlines, the counter got so frustrated with me, like going to the counter and then like trying to figure it out, that so what happened is I was dealing with one clerk, and she left to go on like a lunch break or something. So when I went back, I was like, oh shoot, she's gone. And I asked another clerk, like, I'll just wait until she comes back. And the other clerk said, no, we can help you over here. And I said, well, I just need my boarding pass. And they said, my colleague gave you your boarding pass. And I was like, no, she didn't. She's like, you're lying. My colleague, I saw my colleague give you a boarding pass. And I was like, I don't have a boarding pass. I just don't. Like, this is so weird. And she said, I'm going to call my manager, and my colleague gave you your boarding pass. And she started looking at all the counters to see if maybe it was left around there. And the manager came out. And I said, you guys are telling me I have a boarding pass. I don't have a boarding pass. This is now like a couple hours after everything had happened.
Wow.
I think that, yeah. And it was like, and the next flight that I could have been booked on was the next day, but I could get to another city. I could get to Miami and stay in Miami for a day, which wouldn't hurt. So then she said that, well, they said they gave you your boarding pass. And I said, I'm sorry. There's a lot going on online. I'm recording everything. Can I just take a video of you saying that you gave me my boarding pass? Because I'm having the almost unlucky day. And as I lifted my phone, she said, absolutely not. And she called the police. And then the police came. And so there's a video of me like lifting. You can kind of see me lifting my phone up to take the video, and then when she grabbed the phone, I put the video back down. So that video is on Twitter. And the Orlando police came, and the manager saying, "Get this person out of the building. She needs to be escorted off the grounds right now." And I just held up my hands and I said, "Officers, I've had a really strange day. Please just hear my story." And they did. And they said, to the TSA agents, "Do you have a boarding pass for her?" And they said, "Yes." And they said, "Why can't you print that?" And they said, "We can." And they said, "Print her boarding pass." So it took hours, and then it took the Orlando police to tell American Airlines to print me a boarding pass for me to get on the plane. But then American Airlines released a press statement the next morning, and it wasn't even about American Airlines for me. It was just about the TSA treatment. But then the American Airlines called the cops on me, and then they released a statement the next day that said, Ms. Petosky was immediately booked on American Airlines to Minneapolis-St. Paul to Minneapolis-St. Paul without cost. It was It was unreal. So that's, it's a completely separate issue that, and I'm not even looking for resolution. It's just bizarre that like I happen to have all this national press, and then I happen to have the U.S. government and then this major corporation, American Airlines, lying about me, and it kind of feels bad. It's like
is a strange day. You're right. That is
I'm not even experience. It's like, so that was weird. And then, but I try to make light of it. Like when I was in Miami the next day, and I totally had fun in Miami for a day. And I run a production company, so I'm flexible with my schedule, and luckily that's the thing. A lot of trans people might not be able to take a day off of work or be able to afford rebooking fees and things like that. But I was in Miami, and I posted like a photo of me in Miami asking if I was immediately booked to Minneapolis why I was in Miami, and it's just weird. It's like to me it's like that's kind of that part of it is really funny and weird, but definitely weird.
Well, I just want to thank you so much, Shadi, for telling us your story. And I hope you both agree with this. When something like this happens and it gets the front page of all the digital news world and the Twitterverse and everything that we work in right now, doesn't it reignite the conversation? Doesn't it start the trans conversation and bring more visibility? As terrible as what happened to you, it has sparked up the conversation.
Well,
right?
I think that this... Yeah, and sorry for speaking. I'm so keyed up right now. I'm sorry for interrupting or speaking too fast, but I've just been kind of, high energy for the last couple of days. It's been so strange. Yes, and if you look at the hashtag traveling while trans, you'll see tons of trans people, some, who had issues with the TSA 3 or 4 years ago, disclosing that they're having these problems. And I think based on this happening, I think, hopefully when trans people or any marginalized group runs into the issue, they're going to live tweet it or they're going to tell the community. And, at some point, it might not be with this story, and but at some point they're going to have to say like, well, this happened 100 times or 200 times or 1,000 times. We should do something about it. Maybe they never will. I don't know.
Well, I appreciate everything that you did in this whole story, by live tweeting it, by coming on here and personally sharing. Thank you so much, and I am so sorry that this happened. How are you doing?
Oh, well, like I said, it's been so stressful and high energy. I think I'm really intellectualizing it and just moving from thing to thing to thing. I don't think I haven't slept very much. I had an overnight flight. I ended up not flying American Airlines to get back to Minneapolis after they released that press. So I had to fly to Newark, and there was an overnight flight, and I flew Delta back and ended up paying for a ticket. But so I haven't really slept, and I'm talking to you, and I'm talking to other people, and whoever wants to hear the story for now, and so I haven't really processed it. I'm sure there'll be a day in 3 weeks from now where I'm going to be like, wait, what? Like, everyone knows my business. This feels awful. I definitely had a moment where I was when I was in the room alone and tweeted that photo of me crying. I was terrified. I was terrified that I would, like I said, it was just a lot of unfortunate misunderstandings. I was completely terrified that I was going to be arrested. I was really trying to comply. My shoulders were just slumped. I was just like, please, just, do whatever you need to do to move me down the conveyor belt. I just wanted to get out of there. And in that moment, I was terrified. If a trans person is arrested, like even though because of my genitalia, I'd be likely put into a men's cell, and then that's a whole nother sentence of harassment and sexual assault and all kinds of things like that. So, as a trans person, you definitely try to keep your head down and stay out of trouble. And I was very scared.
I'm going to ask you both. I'm going to ask you both the final question here, and this is your chance to have the entire conversation on the table. Really quick, and start with Neola Young. As far as the TSA traveling while trans, what would you like to see in effective changes? What would you like to see happen, Neola?
I want to see every TSA agent and ongoing, and have institutionalized training, that is ongoing. That's not one time. That is repeated, and it becomes part of the culture of TSA. I mean, like we can talk about, all of the feelings of surveillance while traveling and all of that, is that Shadi pointed out there's a lot of people with a lot of different identities who go through, being pointed out, being singled out, running into a lot of problems because of the body scanners, but also because of just like how people are, how the agents are treating you and talking with you, is making that request of, I want to talk to a supervisor, I want to talk to somebody else, is just like having one of those, people, like a people-centered, a person-centered, conversation of respect. That's what I would like to see. But I would also like to see acknowledgement. I mean, it's just acknowledgement of like, yes, we're really struggling with this, and we are not treating trans people well when they're traveling. And I want to see that acknowledgement, come from TSA, and a deliverable of like, here's what we're going to do about it. These are all of these like feasible, doable, tangible things that we are going to do about this. That's what I would like to see. And I'd like to see people who are not TSA agents and other people, but like people who are just traveling to pay attention to when these things are happening, and to show up for us when we're having hard times. When this was happening with Shadi, it's like, if there was a person who could be like, hey, can I be helpful to you so Shadi could have another person, just some of those acts of kindness and humanity. That's what I would like to see sort of as like an extra effect of that. That's not necessarily just about TSA doing things, but about us as fellow travelers, of just like paying attention to each other.
That's beautiful. I think everybody is afraid, and keeping their heads down and just trying to get through that line, right? So I don't know if we're being the best citizens to each other and fellow travelers to each other in those lines. We're kind of looking out for ourselves. I mean, you're not supposed to touch another person's bag or do any of that sort of stuff. So it's not the most helpful environment in general. But I was actually fortunate in that there was a man who interrupted his travel, and he saw that I was crying, and he saw that I was distressed, and he took video of the police getting there, and he that was amazing. And he caught one of the officers on tape making sort of a crazy hand gesture and kind of teasing me as was after I was released and walking out. So that's great that video exists. That was super helpful. Just if people are looking out for us and each other, that's pretty great. I definitely felt like I was a problem. When I got flagged, it was like, oh, I'm a problem, and I had to disclose that I was transgender. And, when people see me, they don't necessarily know that I'm transgender. So I had to tell people that, and then you have to deal with like the bias against trans people, and are people, seething at me? Are people angry? So yeah, if anybody would have said like, oh, hey, good luck or anything, it might have felt pretty good. But then also on the systemic side, I don't think that a process of a TSA agent. I definitely like what she said about having sorry, I don't know your pronouns actually, but having the TSA agent be trained.
Like their culture, like their whole culture, right?
That's definitely helpful. But the system, which is probably harder to change, of a person looking at somebody, and how they present themselves, and then guessing what genitals or what body they might have, should definitely change as well. If I had to self-select, I could easily tell somebody what I was like. I don't know if it's a technology issue, but they definitely don't need a person pushing like a pink or blue button based on a sight read. I think that probably affects a lot of people, trans and anybody who doesn't conform to gender and sex stereotypes. Mm-hmm. I don't have a statement prepared along those lines. I'm not a person that's ever really thought about this. I'm not a person that's ever like, I'm just advocating kind of for myself and my experience. I wasn't sort of against the TSA or anything. I grew up in the military. I'm totally used to being around people with uniforms, and my mom worked target intelligence, which was a highly classified position. So I'm very used to like security protocol. I've had a military ID since I was 10 years old, so I'm not, this is not that strange to me, but there definitely have to be some changes so that our community isn't just being constantly pulled aside and having their travel delayed and then having to pay rebooking fees and everything else.
Right. Well, and you're standing up for yourself. You're standing up for fair, equal rights, trans rights. I really appreciate you sharing this story, Shadi. And Neola Young, thank you so much for joining us and participating in this discussion. This will be available later, and I hope that we can, in some small way, help continue the conversation and get the word out.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon.
Okay, thank you both. Have a wonderful day.
This is GNR, Gay News Radio.